Okay guys, welcome back to another episode of The Bear Tech. Today we're going to be reclaiming this old desktop computer and turning it into a powerful network attached storage solution for your home or small business. Let's get into it. So if you guys love technology and love getting the latest and greatest, you probably found out that your desktop computer, maybe you've got an i7 7700K, maybe your machine's only 4 years old, and with the recent release of Windows 11, you have found out that that's now not an option for you because of the new TPM2 requirements and the processor limitations that Microsoft has stuck on the recent release of Windows 11. The issue that you may find yourself in is that you're now looking to upgrade your desktop machine and you're going to have a spare computer laying around. Well, the cool thing is that with a piece of software called Unraid, we can turn a consumer grade desktop computer, or equally, server components as well, we can turn it into a powerful, fault-tolerant, network-attached storage device that is up there with the likes of Synology. Then Unraid is a fantastic piece of software, and we can utilize several hard drives to build a parity-protected, fault-tolerant storage solution. So personally, I already use Unraid. Unraid is a fantastic piece of software that is relatively cheap. You can purchase licenses in 3 different configurations. You can go for the basic license, which allows you to have up to 6 storage devices, up to Pro and Unlimited. Personally, I use the basic version. I personally have 3 spinning standard hard drives in my main NAS, and I have a couple of SSDs for caching and hosting Docker containers and virtual machines. Today we're going to be reclaiming this i5 desktop machine that I have, and we're going to be installing some additional hard drives as well as a cache drive, and we're going to see what it takes to build a really awesome alternative to going out and buying a Synology network attached storage device. So you may have previously looked at devices like Synology and QNAP. Why wouldn't you go and purchase one of those devices from Amazon or eBay or from some other retailer, whether that's online or on the street? So to be honest, with these kind of devices, I personally don't like the fact that you've got a vendor lock-in. So for example, if your Synology NAS dies and they need to replace the motherboard inside that Synology system or the QNAP system, that device has got to be either shipped off to Synology, where they'll then provide a replacement part. But once that's out of warranty, you've then got to source a specific motherboard for that device. Whereas with Unraid, it's running Linux. So you can pretty much use any motherboard configuration, bang a whole load of hardware together. It's really good for hardware compatibility. The other really great thing that I love about Unraid is the ability with its parity protected array, and hence the name Unraid, we can grow our storage array over time. We can add disks at any point in time. We don't have to rebuild the array from scratch. Whereas other offerings such as TrueNAS or FreeNAS as it was previously known, the problem is that whilst you can create a RAID 5 array, all of the disks have to be the same size. And also you can't just add storage devices of random sizes. Whereas Unraid allows you to, as long as your parity drives are larger or equal to the largest drive in your drive pool, then you can easily just add more storage over time. So what I will be doing is I have 3 spare hard drives that I have laid out here. I have a Seagate 3TB desktop grade hard drive. I have a 4TB Western Digital Red Pro drive and a 6TB Western Digital Black drive. So you can also mix and match disk speeds. For example, all of these are a 7200 RPM. However, it doesn't matter. You can use a 5200 speeds disks. It really doesn't matter at all. So what else do we need? Well, Unraid boots and is installed onto a USB flash device. So here I have a Sandisk Cruiser Blade device. It's 64 gigabytes of storage and works great for Unraid. We'll log onto a computer and we'll install the software to the USB stick. This entire process is extremely simple and easy to do, and I'll walk you through every step of this process of getting Unraid set up. Let's jump into it. Right, okay guys, so now I'm on the computer, and what we're going to do is, without plugging our USB stick in just yet, we're going to head on over to unraid.net. So open the browser, head over to unraid.net, and then press enter, and then you should be greeted with the home page as shown here. Next, what we need to do is click on the download button up here in the top right of the screen. So clicking on that should bring us to the downloads page. So to install Unraid, we actually install it onto a USB thumb drive or a USB flash media device. And to do that, we're going to use the Unraid USB creator software. So over here, as you can see, we have the ability to download for Mac or download for Windows. As I'm on a Windows machine, I'm going to use this bottom link here. In theory, if you're on a Mac, it should already be highlighted with this white box that surrounds this download for Windows. But anyway, we're going to click on that now, and we should have a download appearing shortly. There we go. So I'm going to head over to my downloads folder, and we can now close the browser, and we can just double click the icon like so. So by default, the options available to us should appear as follows. So the version that appears should be stable. We've got a couple of other options, but stable is the version that we want, so we're going to select that. Next up, we've got the version of Unraid that we're actually going to be downloading and installing to the USB stick. By default, this will be the latest version, which is, at the time of recording at least, Unraid 6.9.2. So we can leave that as well. However, there are other versions if you need something specific. However, I would personally recommend you leave it at Unraid 6.9.2. Next up, we've got a customize button. Now, you don't necessarily have to click on this and use these features. However, I personally like to, because we can customize the server's name, and we can also assign a static IP address to our server when it first boots. So you won't have to go and hunt around for whatever IP address has been given to your Unraid server from your router, or if you're running a separate DHCP server on your network. So I'm going to leave the server name as tower for now. That's fine. We'll change that shortly once we're actually inside the web control panel of Unraid. However, I am going to select static IP address, and I'm going to just enter an IP address on my network that I know is free. Just as I said, just so we don't have to go hunting around for the DHCP allocated address later. So I'm going to type in here 172.25.87.172.25. Press tab to move across to the next section. 87, and then I'm going to use 28, and then I'm just going to set my gateway. So this is this will be the IP address of your router most probably, unless you've got a special network setup or an advanced network setup, should I say. And DNS server is again most likely to be your gateway IP address. Okay, we can leave netmask as is. For you guys, you're probably using a more conventional IP subnet for your home or office network. So personally, if you're not really sure as to what you're doing here, I would leave it on DHCP, and you can find that shortly. However, if you do have an IP subnet that you have set up in your network, and you know of an IP address that's free, I'd certainly recommend you setting it in this section now. It just saves, configuration changes later. So anyway, now we've completed that part. I'm now going to insert the USB stick into the machine. As you can see at the moment, we've actually got nothing in this drop-down box, which is where we need to select that USB stick in a second. So I'm going to plug it in now, and we should then have the option to write the media to that flash drive. Okay, depending on what you've currently got on your USB drive, it may pop up here. I'm just going to close this now. And as you can see, the actual application itself has automatically updated this drop-down menu and has detected my Sandisk Cruiser Blade USB stick. If it doesn't, however, for whatever reason, use this refresh button here, and that should recheck your system for any plugged-in compatible USB devices. One thing to note, however, not all USB thumb drives or USB flash media devices are supported by Unraid. On the Unraid website shown here, under the prerequisites, and on the wiki.unraid.net, there are some prerequisites. USB manufacturers such as PNY, Lexar, Sandisk, Samsung are recommended. But they do not, however, support USB 3.1 drives. So obviously pay special attention here. I'd personally recommend getting a Sandisk Cruiser Blade. I know that works. I use them on both of my Unraid servers, and they work a treat. Also pay attention to the fact that the USB flash device needs to be 2 GB or larger. Personally, I'm using a 64 GB flash device, but yeah, I've gone for the Sandisk Cruiser Blade 64 gig version. So now we're back at the USB flash creator. Simply click on the right button as shown here. And then obviously we need to just pay attention and be 100% sure we've selected the correct device. So before hitting erase and write, just make sure that what you're seeing here does match what you've plugged into your machine. And it's certainly safer if you have multiple USB flash devices plugged into your machine to maybe remove those first of all, just to ensure that you don't make a mistake. But anyway, once you're happy, click on the erase and write button here. So this is now going to take a few seconds. As you can see, once this bar gets across, we should be good to go. Okay, you may have this window pop up. You can simply close this and just wait for this process to complete. Right, okay, so the process is now done. So we can now click close on this window, and we can go down and eject our media. Okay, so now the USB stick has been fully created. We can now use this to plug into our Unraid server and boot the operating system from this USB drive. Right, okay guys, this is the computer we're going to be using. As you can see, this is in a Corsair case. It's an i5. So I'm just going to remove the thumb screws from the side here. And just take off this cover. Oh, it's dusty. If you're reclaiming an old machine, it probably is going to be dusty. Ideally, get a hoover in there first. Be careful not to touch any of the components, but clear it up. Obviously you're now going to breathe a whole load of new life into this computer, or into your machine, should I say. So, it's best to clean it up, give the fans a bit of a clean, get the hoover in. Like I say, just be careful with the components that you're touching with any sort of metal hoover hose or hose pipe, etc. But what I'm going to do is, I don't intend to run Plex on this server. I've already got it running on my main server. This particular server is going to be a backup machine that I'll be using to store backups in. So therefore I'm going to take out this graphics card here, this old NVIDIA Asus graphics card, just so really we're not consuming power, and we're actually allowing more power from our main power supply to power our additional hard drives that we'll be installing today. So first of all, let's disconnect the power supply. So I'm just going to take out the screws that hold this graphics card in place. And if you've got one of these large graphics cards, there'll be a little retaining clip which you'll just need to push down behind it to eject that out of the slot. So push down and just ease the graphics card out, like so. Okay, so now as you can see, it's pretty bare, and it's now exposed our Sata ports. So on this particular motherboard, we've got 6 Sata connectors. On older motherboards, you might notice that they're different speeds. However, all 6 of these, they are actually 6 gigabits per second, which is pretty decent for a machine of this age. This is I think it's about probably 8 years old now. Like I say, it's an i5, it's got 16 gigs of RAM, which is going to be good for running virtual machines if I decide to run any virtual machines in future, or Docker containers, etc. Actual network attached storage servers don't really require that much memory. You don't have to have much RAM at all to run Unraid, or for general file sharing, to be honest, because you're really just passing data and that data is getting stored to the disks. However, if you've got 4 gigabytes of RAM or upwards, I'd certainly recommend 8 gigabytes of RAM as a minimum. Now that's done, I'm going to get the hard drives and we'll mount them into the caddies so we can then slide them into this drive bay here. Depending upon your particular case manufacturer, they may have different ways of actually inserting and installing hard drives. Some cheaper cases, you'll probably just have little screws that attach the hard drives into the bays down the side. However, this particular case, this Corsair case, we use these sort of plastic drive caddies. So this particular caddy itself, we've just got these little retaining pins, if you like, which we can use to just push the hard drive in. It's semi-flexible, so we can just flex and install the hard drives that way. So I'm just going to get the hard drive and ensure that we install it the correct way. So here are the data and the power connectors. So I'm just going to, for example, in this particular case, we need to install it like so. So I'm just going to line up the screw holes with the retaining pins. I'm just going to flex that open slightly. And then there you go. So that's our first hard drive. And we're just going to repeat that process for our other hard drives. And finally, I now install the 4TB Western Digital Red Pro drive into its drive tray. So now we've actually got some other cables that are no longer needed, and like I mentioned, this particular power supply is modular, so I can disconnect any of these cable looms that aren't required. So I'm going to clean up the cables in a second, but first of all, I'm just going to slide these discs into our drive assembly so that we're ready to move on. So personally, as a convention I like to use, I like to stick the parity discs at the top. So I'm going to slide that one in here, and then the other drives below it, like so. So a quick tip, in future, you may need to replace one of these drives if one fails. The cool thing about Unraid is that it will actually email you if a drive fails. To open up the machine without having to pull them all out and disconnect them from the rear, I'd recommend you maybe put a label on them if they don't already have the serial number, because Unraid will actually tell you what the serial number is of the drive that's failed or is starting to fail. So if you're not seeing the serial number on these labels here, I'd maybe recommend just printing off a little label, maybe just with the last, I don't know, 6 characters from the serial number, just to make your life easier if you do need to open up the side of your case in future to replace a failing or dead drive. Okay, so next up, we need to turn the machine around. We're going to connect our additional power connectors so that our power supply can power these drives. In addition to that, however, we've also got this other SSD drive, which we'll install. But for now, what we'll do is we'll just turn the machine around and we'll provide power to these drives and feed the serial ATA cables from the motherboard to each of these drives. What I'm probably going to do is here on this particular motherboard, we've got 2 Sata ports up here and we've got an additional 4 down here. So in order to try and keep things clean and tidy, what I'll do is I'll power the storage array from these 4 down here. Like I said, in this particular motherboard, they're all 6 gigabits per second, so it's not like I'm running a slower speed for the drive array. However, if you are, I would certainly recommend that you install your SSDs for your cache pool onto the faster Sata ports. So for example, you may find that these 2 are actually faster, and in which case connect those directly to your cache storage, because those are the drives that are going to benefit from the higher speed from the motherboard. Okay, so let's turn this around and we'll take the back off. As you can see, we've now got access to connect these additional hard drives up to the power as well as our serial ATAs to the data cables. So now I'm going to take this serial ATA power cable and I'm going to power each of the hard drives and feed this through to the power supply like so. There doesn't have to be any order to this, so just make sure that the connectors line up correctly. Okay, and as you can see, the hard drives are actually quite close to where the back panel would sit. So we're going to have to kind of manipulate these cables a bit just so that we can get the back panel back on. Okay, so now each of the hard drives have got power, or will have power to them from the main power supply, we now just need to feed through the data cables. So not all serial ATA power cables are created equally. Some you'll find are capable of 6 gigabits per second. Some will only support slower speeds. So I just recommend that if you are purchasing serial ATA cables, that you do get ones that match your drive speed. If you're just going to buy a pack of these, I'd personally recommend just getting 6 gigabit per second capable serial ATA cables, because they are backwards compatible. I'll just feed one through here now for the cache drive that will be up here. Right, okay, so now that's done, I'm just going to flip it back over and we'll connect up the hard drives. At this point, it's good to just do some cable management. Let's remove some of the modular power cables that were used for the graphics card. Obviously, we're not going to need them in this build, so I'm just going to take them out and then we'll route the cables for the hard drives. Okay, so these are our SATA connectors for the hard drives. I purposely chose 2 of the white tabbed ones here for these 2, which are the storage drives, and I've used the black connector here for the parity drive. So it just enables me to recall which one's is which, but obviously it doesn't matter at all. So I'm just going to plug these in now. It's always best to try and keep your cables tidy when obviously building new machines or modifying your internals. Just allows airflow to maintain the best paths. Some motherboards will have some limitations. If you've got an onboard M2 connector slot on your motherboard, then sometimes they'll do weird things like disable certain serial ATA ports to make that work. So you just consult your manufacturer's motherboard if you get some strange results once you've set this up. Okay, so that is now the 3 hard drives that are now connected to the serial ATA ports on the motherboard. I'm now going to connect the SATA cable for our cache drive. So I'm going to use, again, we've got numbers on here. So this one here is serial ATA 1, so I'm just going to use that. Like I say, the reason why I'm using the lower ports for these is just to really keep things sort of standardized. So if I, mentally make a note of the fact that my storage pool is on these lower ports, then it just keeps things simple, and then I know that the cache drives are up the top. Like I might have mentioned earlier, some motherboards will have different speed SATA connectors. So if you do, all of mine on this particular motherboard are all capable of 6 gigabits per second. So my cache drive is now connected up here, and my storage drives are connected on these lower serial ATA ports. Right, okay, so now I've got the cables connected, the hard drives are in. I'm now just going to do some cable management here, tidy up some of these cables, get rid of the ones which we no longer need. I'm going to connect the cache drive shortly as well, and then we'll put the case back on, and then we'll go and take it over, connect it up to a monitor, plug in our USB stick, and we'll go through some recommended BIOS changes, especially if you want to use this for virtualization and Docker containers, and then we'll start the installer. Right, okay, so the computer's now plugged in, let's power it on, and we're going to get access to the BIOS. So you'll probably notice a screen appear in a second, giving us some information. As you can see, press delete or F2 to enter the BIOS. So I'm just going to press F2 on my particular computer. Your machine might be different. Just make sure you press F2 or the key that you require to get into the BIOS. And then you should be greeted with the BIOS screen in a second. Okay, great. So now we're in. I can see that the correct amount of RAM has been detected. I'm going to click on SATA information just to check that the hard drives have all been detected correctly, which they have on their right 6 gig ports. Perfect. So I'm going to close that. Next up, I'm going to go into advanced mode. Your BIOS may be different to mine. However, you just need to find the equivalent on your particular BIOS. So I'm just going to click onto advanced mode. Advanced mode, yes. And I'm specifically going to check that Intel virtualization is enabled. This is particularly important if we want to run Docker containers or install virtual machines in future. I'm just going to take this opportunity to check that now. So I'm going to click on advanced, and I'm going to go to CPU configuration and just check that Intel virtualization technology is enabled, which it is. That's great. Next up, and the final thing which we need to do in here is we're going to change the boot order. So we want to boot from the USB stick, disable any other boot options. So I'm going to select boot option 1, UEFI Sandisk. So I'm going to select that. Boot option 2, I'm going to disable all the others and disable that. Disabled. So this machine, when we turn it on, is going to boot from our USB drive only. Okay, so now what we can do is we can exit out of here and save the changes. So click exit, exit, save changes and reset. So now we're rebooting with those BIOS changes. We should now be taken to the Unraid installer. So we can just leave it alone here. This is automatic. That will just carry on in a second. So great, Unraid is now booted up correctly. As you can see here, 172.25.87.28. That is the IP address that I set when we created the installation media. So at this point, we can now shut down the machine. If we just log in here quickly, we'll shut it down and we can now remove the monitor, disconnect the keyboard and mouse, and we can now go and put this server over in a corner and just ensure that it's got power connected to it, as well as a network cable. Everything else which we need to do on this server now, we're going to jump across to a Windows computer and we'll do it via the browser. So I'm just going to log in. So we're going to type in root. There's no password by default. We're just going to now type in shutdown -H, so -H for halt, and then now, and we'll give it a few seconds. It's going to shut down all the services and spin the disks down. Okay, perfect. So now let's jump across and we'll go and start the installation and configuration of Unraid. So as you can see, I've typed in 172.25.87.28. That's the IP address that I set up originally when we created the USB media. However, if you're using DHCP, your server would have picked up an automatic IP address from your home router or some other DHCP server that's running on your network. Normally what you can do is you can log into that router and find out which IP address was allocated to the server. If you didn't use any of the advanced settings, the computer name will be tower. So on the list of allocated IP addresses, you should see the computer name tower, and then it should give you the IP address. For most of you, most home networks would generally use the standard 192.168.1 or 0 dot something IP range. Alternatively, you may find like a 10.1 address. But that is solely dependent upon your network and how your network was set up. However, open up your browser, you need to navigate to the IP address, and then you should be presented with this screen here. So when we first start up Unraid, we are given the option to allocate disks, etc. And as I mentioned before, I'm using a 6 terabyte Western Digital for my parity drive. And just remember, your parity drive must be the largest or equal to any of the other disks inside your storage array. And your parity drives will limit and restrict the size of drives that you can add to your storage pool in future. So it's always best to use your largest drive as the parity disk. So here I'm going to select Western Digital, and I can see here it's the 6 terabyte one. So I'm going to use that for my parity drive. As you can see, that's now set that as the parity drive. And then underneath there we have disks 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way down to 22. Now we can change this drop down here to reduce the amount of drive allocation fields that we have available. And so I might as well just do that now. So technically we can actually have 6 here. So for this particular setup, I'm only going to use 1 parity drive. I don't have enough disks to really warrant 2. And because this server really is just a backup server, it's not mission critical. I don't really need to have that extra layer of protection or fault tolerance. So I'm now going to start assigning my disks. So it really doesn't matter what order these go in. However, I will choose the largest to the smallest. So my next one I'm going to add is the Western Digital Red Pro. So I'm going to select this one here, 4 terabyte. I'll give Unraid a second to just load. And then finally 3 terabyte. Okay, so that is now our storage array setup. So now I'm going to add the Sandisk cache drive. So to do that, we need to add it to our cache pool. So to do that, we're going to click on Add Pool. I'm going to create a pool there called Cache. So I'm just going to call it Cache, and we've got 1 slot. I'm just going to click Add. So it's highly recommended if you have multiple SSDs to actually add more than 1 cache drive. That will allow you to create a cache mirror so that if any of your cache drives fail, you're not going to lose that data that is sitting on that pool. However, for me, this is, like I said, this is just going to be used as a backup server. My main server, however, does use multiple SSDs for its cache pool to give that extra layer of fault tolerance. So now you can see we've got this cache pool here which we've created, and we can now assign our Sandisk SSD Plus. So I'm going to click on that, and that's now going to load. You don't have to do this all at the start. Like I say, you can come in, you can stop the array, and then you can add or you can amend your storage arrays and your cache pools whenever you like. But I just thought for now, and for the purpose of the video, we'll just set up everything so you get an understanding or the theory behind adding these disks onto Unraid. Okay, so as you can see, we've got the Western Digital 6 terabyte used as our parity drive. Inside our storage array, we've got a 4 terabyte Western Digital Red, and we've got this 3 terabyte Seagate drive. As you can see, it's pretty cool, the interface. It shows you the temperatures of the hard drives. It'll also warn you about any errors on the drive later, and it will flag up when disks go bad and you need to replace them. It's a super easy process to swap out a drive, and then when you reboot Unraid, you get the option to rebuild the array. It is so simple to do, and I really do recommend using Unraid. Because of how Unraid has implemented a parity protected array, unlike normal RAID 5 that you might get inside the likes of TrueNAS or Open Media Vault, you know, Unraid, you can add any disks of any size. It really can be like a Frankenstein setup. You can just stick any types of drives in and you can add them to your storage pool, and it works really, really well. So anyway, now that the drives have been allocated, we will get a warning here. All existing data on this drive will be overwritten when the array is started. So like I said earlier, just make sure that you don't have any data on those disks. They may be brand new disks if you're building a server from scratch, but if you're like me and I'm just sort of clobbering together old reclaimed hard drives from other machines to make use of them on this particular server, then just be aware that you need to get the data off first, because these drives will be overwritten and formatted during this process. So once we're done, all we need to do is click Start. Okay, and like you'll see here, you'll get various different messages. We can simply ignore those. This process is going to take some time. It's essentially going to combine all of those disks into an Unraid parity protected array. Okay, and something that I should mention here, if you're using old drives, you may notice that when you first start the array, and it goes through that initial process of building up the array, you may have these messages that appear here. So it says unmountable unsupported partition layout. So if you are using reclaimed disks with existing data, you should also make sure that we scroll down and when you see the unmountable disks present, we need to click on this yes checkbox here to say that we want to format all of these drives. So by formatting the drives will then enable us to use within Unraid. So I'm going to click format as well here. So again, whilst this will take a while, it's completely normal, and we need to do that to ensure that these drives can be used inside Unraid. So these drives are now formatted, which is good. However, the parity sync part of this process will take a lot longer. You can check on progress in the bottom right hand side of the browser. As you can see, our current data rebuild is at 0.4%. This doesn't, however, stop us from configuring the rest of the system. So let's just quickly jump in now to the users and share section so we can start creating a file share, and I can show you how to connect to that file share from a Windows-based computer. Okay, so heading up to here, we can click on shares. And as you can see, we have some default shares. So these shares are actually required and used by Unraid. So just as a quick overview as to what each of these shares do, app data is used for storing Docker information. So where you've got different Docker containers, information will be stored inside this share, such as Docker container specific application data and configuration details. Then we have the domains. So the domain share is used by VMs, so virtual disks and VM configurations live within inside this domains share here. Then we have another default share called ISOs. So ISOs is, as you might expect, where Unraid will default look for operating system installation media for when you create virtual machines inside Unraid. The ISOs can be stored in there. You can access and drop your Ubuntu server or your Windows installation ISOs into that folder there, and then when you create your virtual machines, you can select to install from one of those ISOs. And then we have the system. So the system share is where Unraid actually stores its configuration information. So for example, any customizations to the web interface, all of the share information that Unraid loads up at startup to expose the folders and directories on this system to the network. And then clicking on each of these, you can see additional information. So first of all, let's go and create a new user. So in this example, I'm going to create a new user for myself. I'm going to call this username. This is the username that you'll be using to connect to the drive from other computers on your network. So this is what Windows would ask you for the username when you are connecting to the share. So a quick tip, if your username matches your current Windows username and password, you won't be prompted to log in when you access the share or map a network drive in future. So it's worth bearing that in mind. If, however, it does differ, you will have to manually connect and provide a username and password when you try to connect to the network drive or the share in this case. So description, I'm just going to call it Bobby. And then it's up to you. So here you can add a custom image. It doesn't actually do anything other than when you click on the users tab, it just displays a list of users and it will show an avatar for that user. So it's entirely up to you if you want to do that. Personally, I don't do that. I've never done that. Like I said, I've got other servers running Unraid and I simply don't use that icon. And then here we're going to enter a password. So we can just type in a password here and again there. And then we click add. I'm just going to click don't save. Unraid will now take a few seconds and the user has been added. So if we click back to users using this little link up here, you can see we've got Bobby and we've got root. So root is the user account that we're using obviously to log into Unraid. We can click on this now and we can update the account if needs be. We can set a password as well, which I highly recommend you do, because at the moment, as you probably noticed, you can log into the Unraid control panel without any authentication. So I'm just now going to set a password up here and hit change and don't save. Okay, so once you set a password for your root user, you'll be taken back to the login screen. So now just use that root account to log back in. So username is root and then enter the password that you just typed in for that root account. And then press enter. It's up to you if you want to save obviously the credentials in your browser. I'm not going to. And as you can see, the parity sync stroke data rebuild, as you can see, is still running. We're now at 1.5%. Like I say, that will take many hours, but that doesn't stop us setting up shares and using the system right now. So we might as well just carry on doing that. However, just be aware that until that is completed, if one of the hard drives dies, you won't necessarily be protected. Unraid is also really good in the fact that data is actually spanned across disks, and you can change the configuration inside Unraid. So we can, for example, on the shares, we can say how we want the data stored on a particular share. So you can actually say that all data on a particular share should be stored to a certain disk. Maybe you've got a 7200 RPM drive, which you would prefer to have your Plex media on. So that'd be a really good use case for making sure that the data goes on that drive as opposed to a 5400 RPM drive, which would obviously be slower. So generally 7200 RPM drives are more prone to failure because they're running at higher disk speeds. And I believe that research has shown that the 5200 speed hard drives are actually more reliable over time. So you may then want to, for example, move family photos and other things to a 5400 RPM drive. So it's really up to you how you want to configure Unraid, and we're really only just scratching the surface today. But I just wanted to show you how you can create a share, simple users. We can assign some permissions to certain network shares and how we can access them from our computers. So bearing in mind, we've now got our user set up, we've got B. Allen, and we've got a user called root. We can now go and create a share and assign permissions to that user. Let's just quickly add another quick test user just so I can demonstrate how you can give permissions to certain users to certain shares. So I'm going to click add user. I'm going to create another user and we'll call this Ruby. And I'm just going to call it Ruby there. And we're just going to put password in of password and password again. Click add. Don't save. Okay, and then now that's done, we can now click on users again, and you can see we've now got Bobby and Ruby. So now we're going to head over to the shares tab. Next up, we're going to create a couple of shares. So the first share I'm going to add, I'm going to click add share, and we're going to call this one here, we'll call it footage. A share for storing video footage. So in this example, I'm going to create a share for our video footage. I'm going to pretend that I have access to upload all that footage to the server, so I can write to this particular share. But let's say Ruby is another remote editor. I only want her account to have read access to that share to prevent her from accidentally deleting any media footage that I've uploaded in the past. Obviously, that would be disastrous because we're not going to want to go back and re-record video footage because it's going to use up a whole lot of time. So this would be a great setup. Say, for example, if you've got a team of editors, you want to have a certain account that can upload that media to the server, but all of the editors should have read-only access to prevent them from accidentally deleting any content. So in this example, I'm going to show you how I'd set up that share. So we've got the share names called footage, and then we've got the description, a share for storing video footage. So this option here, use cache pool for new files and directories. So if you only have a single drive in your cache pool, you've got to be aware that until the mover, which is a piece of software that Unraid uses to move data from the fast SSD based cache to the parity protected array, that data is until that has run, and although you can run that manually from the Unraid interface, which I'll demonstrate to you in a second, that does leave your data vulnerable to accidentally go missing if the drive was to fail. So here in this instance, footage is important to me. I don't want to have to re-record it, and therefore, because I only have one SSD in my cache array, I'm going to make sure that I select no for use cache. So by selecting no here, data that we upload to the server, although it will be a lot slower because it's writing to those spinning hard drives, which are obviously slower than SSD storage. It's also writing parity information back to the parity disk. So although this is going to be a lot slower, this does give us peace of mind that it's going to be protecting that parity array. And if any of the drives fail, we can still access the data, and then we have the opportunity to replace the damaged disk to then bring that parity protection back. So again, I'm going to click no here. We then got some other options, which although I won't necessarily go through in any depth, I will just briefly explain them. If we hover and click on each of these, this will explain the different details as to how these options function. So allocation method, if we click on that, you can see high water, choose the lowest numbered disk with a free space still above the current high water mark. The high water mark is initialized with the size of the largest disk divided by 2. Then obviously we've got other options here, such as fill up, choose the lowest numbered disk that still has free space. But you can obviously go away after watching this video, go and do some further research into how you want to set up your Unraid system. However, it's safe to say that most of the default options will work great for you. So maybe start off with these settings, and you can always go and change the settings later on. You'll probably find that once you start using Unraid, you'll absolutely love it, and you'll invest that time into going to read the Unraid website, the documentation there, so you can certainly go and customize your setup at a later date if you like. So again, I'm just going to now hit add share. So as you can see, the share has now been added. We've now got some additional options. We've got export. So clicking on this, you can see that export basically shows you that the setting which determines whether it's visible or accessible. Again, we want to be able to access this share on other machines, so I'm going to leave this at yes. Use case sensitive names, I'm going to leave that as auto, and security, we're going to change this now to private. And then we're going to click on apply, and then that will now give us some additional options, so we can now allocate the type of access that the user has to this particular share. So whilst we can, if you've got other shares on your Unraid system, you can copy those shares in by using this drop down. At the moment, we don't have any other shares set up, so I'm going to give myself, as I mentioned, read and write access. Yeah, I'm going to restrict Ruby's access so that she can only read data from this share. So I'm going to set her access to read only, and then I'm going to hit apply. So this share is now ready to use. We can access it from all machines on our network, and we can log in to gain the access that we require. However, let's just quickly go and create another share now, add another share, and we'll call this share photos. So photos, and we'll just say family photos. Use cache pool, no. So I've created a share called family photos, which is going to allow anyone, any user on the system to be able to read and write files to that share. So I'm just going to accept the rest of the defaults and click add share. And I'm now going to set the security level to private, apply that. I'm just going to give the required access levels to each of those users on our system. So I'm going to hit ballen, read write, Ruby, read write, and apply. Okay, so now those shares are set up, we can now access them from all machines on our network. So now what we'll do is we'll head over to Windows Explorer and access those shares. Okay, so on Windows, we would access the share by going //172.25.87.28, which is the IP address of our Unraid server, as I mentioned earlier. So press enter here, and as you can see, we're now having those shares appear. So we've got footage and photos. This flash share, however, we're going to change that shortly. By accessing this, it actually gives us access to the USB content of the USB stick. So this is where, like I mentioned earlier, Unraid stores its configuration details, but we're just going to secure up our Unraid server shortly. So we'll actually be disabling access and prohibiting network access to that flash drive. So anyway, we've now got these two shares. We've got footage and photos. My user account can access them just fine, as could Ruby's, and we can now just upload some data to these shares. Maybe I'll just create a new folder in here, and we'll call that test footage, and we can access in there, and we can create a new text file, for example, hello, and then it will just, this is a test. Save that, exit it, and as you can see on our share, on our footage share, we've now got a new directory created, and inside there we've got a text file. this is a test. And obviously, as you would expect, we can also photo share, and we can copy files in, etc. So instead of having to type in the server's IP address into the Explorer navigation bar, we can actually map a network drive. So when we start up our computer, it will automatically map a network drive so that we can access those files faster and more easily. So anyway, we can right click on here and we can select map network drive. We can choose a drive. So as this is video footage, maybe we might use the drive letter F. So we can choose F there, and we've got some options to reconnect to sign in, or we can connect using different credentials. Unless you've got a specific need to log into that share with different credentials, I'd recommend leaving it at default. It's up to you if you want this network drive to be mapped automatically. I personally find it super useful, so I'm just going to hit finish here. And if we click on this PC, you'll notice that we've now got this share appear here called footage, and was showing us the available storage space. Right, so now we've got our share set up. There is just so much that you can do with Unraid, and this video could go on for hours if I was to delve into all of the other features that Unraid can provide you with. However, for now, I think this is a great first sort of primer and introduction into how you can build up an Unraid server by reclaiming an old PC, or even, you know, if you've got the money and the budget and you want to go out and actually build like a super powerful Unraid server, then by all means, please do. Okay, next up, we're going to go and fix the issue with the flash share. So as you can see, by hovering over the triangle here, you can see that the flash device is set as a public share. And it says here to please change the share SMB security, click on flash above this message. So to fix this, and just to recap, as you can see by navigating to our server on the network, you can see we have this flash share here, and this is publicly accessible. Anyone on the network can access that and could potentially delete files or change files within inside this share. Just to recap, this flash share is actually the USB drive that Unraid uses to store its operating system on, and which it boots from. So to fix that, we just need to go back to here, and as the message says, please change share SMB settings, click on flash above this message. So I'm going to click on flash. So now what we're going to do is we're going to change export to no and hit apply. So export essentially says, do we want this share accessible over the network? So by changing that to no, we should now be able to go back to here and refresh this view, and we should now only have our footage and our photos shares available to us, which is great. So that is now fully secure. We know that Unraid is now set up securely, and the only shares that are available are the ones which we've created as part of this video. So going back over to the dashboard now, we can see a whole load of information. Unraid's really good at showing us information about our server. As you can see, with the parity sync is still working at the moment. It tells us about any errors, any disk problems, temperatures of our disks. It tells us the amount of utilization of these hard drives, as well as RAM utilization, CPU utilization. It'll output the CPU model that you have on your server, information about your motherboard, uptime information, as well as network card information and traffic. So we can also do other things. So for example, in here, if we click edit, we can actually change what our case looks like. Okay, this is quite trivial, I guess, but it's quite a nice little customization feature for your Unraid server. So you can actually also upload a custom image here. So if you don't find one that suits your server or one that you're not happy with, you could use this option here to select and upload your own custom icon. There's a whole load of other settings which we can do on the server. We can access the actual terminal of the server here, so root at tower. Tower, remember, is the default name that Unraid will give to this server when you first install it. All of those settings, however, can be changed inside the settings window. We can click on identification, and as you can see here, the array must be stopped before we can make changes, but we can change the server name here, we can set a description, and we can set other model information if needs be. So like I said, Unraid is a great tool. It's got loads of features and functionality. I'll quickly just walk you through the different tabs now just to show you what they are and what they can do. So this is the dashboard page. This gives us an overview of our server. It shows any running Docker containers, any running virtual machines. As I've mentioned, I've not installed or configured any at the moment. This video, I wanted to keep this video as short as possible just to show you how to set up a network attached storage server on Unraid and to give you that basic file sharing functionality. We then got the main tab. The main tab really just shows us disk information, disk utilization, how much storage we have free and available. We've got options here which allows us to manipulate the array. Tells us other things like clear stats. We can run the mover. So the mover, like I mentioned, is where it moves files from your cache pool or your SSDs to the parity protected array. So although that is run automatically, nightly I believe, you can come in here and click move to automatically move those files across. So as I mentioned earlier on in the video, whilst it might not be a good idea for you to use a single cache drive if you're moving important information, because if you only have a single cache drive and that cache drive fails, you essentially lose the data on that cache drive if it's not been moved to the parity protected array. Then you could, if you still wanted to benefit from the transfer speed, you could come in here and click move and know that you've manually moved that content onto the parity protected array. We've got other options here, like we can reboot the server, we can shut down the server. So everything in here is really about the disks and the actual server itself, so operations for the server. Then we've got the shares tab, which we looked at briefly earlier on the video, where we created the shares. We can actually view the data on these shares. So if we click on photos, you can see the contents of that, ISOs, etc., and app data. We can also click on the names of the shares to be able to reconfigure how the share stores data, if we only want data to exist on certain drives or to exclude certain drives, as well as we can change the configuration of how data is stored on the array. So yeah, so simply clicking on a share will open up the additional settings. This is where we'd also can change access permissions to that particular share. And then we've got the users tab. Again, which we've already looked at earlier. We can add users here. We can click on a user. We can change access for that user to certain shares, as well as reset their password on this screen. Next up, we've got the settings tab. Settings tab gives us a whole load of different options for various different things that relate specifically to our Unraid server setup. Like I said, we won't really delve into much in this particular video, but there is a whole load of cool stuff here which we can revisit and investigate later. Next up, we've got plugins. So Unraid has full support for plugins for doing all kinds of things. There's some really great plugins out there. One which I definitely recommend you looking at is the community plugins. So that is a separate system where you can pull in the likes of Plex, all kinds of applications from proxy servers to video encoding to other web-based features. Really great, really great. But like I said, we can revisit this in another video if you like more content on Unraid. Next up, we've got Docker. So you can add Docker containers here. You can add them, we can manage them all from here. The cool thing about Unraid is that it'll also tell you when there are updates for Docker containers. And from this screen, we can very easily just update a Docker container with a single click. Next up, we've got VMs. So VM stands for virtual machines. We can add KVM-based virtual machines here. So we can click on add, and we've got the option to add all different kinds of operating systems. So as you might expect, we've got all the different Windows versions. Windows 11 support for Unraid is actually coming in the next release. So although you're not actually seeing it here, it's coming. So just hold tight. Next up, we've got tools, and tools, there are all kinds of different things in this section. So we can look at the running processes that are currently running on our server, diagnostics. So here's where you could get information about if you've got issues with your machine, etc. Hardware profiles, page maps, all kinds of different information. As well as updating the Unraid operating system, we can click Update OS, and we can check for updates here. Obviously, we only installed this yesterday, so we're going to be running the latest version, so we're fine. As you can see, we're up to date. So if you decide that you really do like Unraid and it's something that you want to continue with after the 30-day trial, you can then activate Unraid using the registration icon underneath Tools Registration, and then you can basically use the information on this page to register your Unraid license. So by clicking on Purchase Key, this will take you to the Unraid website, where you can then choose the version of Unraid that you want to purchase. Once purchase is complete, you'll then be given a link to copy in here. You simply paste that into here and click install key. That key is then linked to the USB drive that Unraid that you copied and you're running Unraid from. So the great thing about Unraid licenses is that you get free updates with them for any versions going forwards. If you find that you really do like using Unraid, I definitely think it's worth the money and investment. This video isn't sponsored at all. I'm just, personally, I absolutely love Unraid as a set and forget operating system for providing that network attached storage functionality and the ability to add drives of any size into your storage array and grow your system over time. So I've really enjoyed doing this video. It's been a video that I've wanted to do for a while now. I wanted to share my love of Unraid and show you guys that, Synology or QNAP aren't the only ways to go. You can actually build a super powerful system at home by reclaiming an old computer. Don't throw them out. Things shouldn't go to landfill unless they really need to. The only thing I would say maybe about using an older computer is that obviously power consumption on older computers are generally higher than more modern hardware. So it's kind of a trade-off as to whether you want to go and build an awesome home NAS, go out and buy some hardware, stick it all together. It's so fun building your own network servers. This is just one example. I personally like to reuse my old machines. I don't see the point of going out and buying new stuff. I certainly don't like sending things to landfill. So, hopefully this video has demonstrated to you, just what you could do with old computers, and especially, if you're now looking to, you want to use the latest and greatest version of Windows 11 and machine is not supported, spend the money, buy a basic license for Unraid. If you've got some old hard drives or you want to go and invest in some hard drives, bung them in your Unraid server, and you've got that additional storage space. You're protected by the parity protection of the Unraid array, and I think why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you? If you've got an old computer, utilize it. You can share that data with people on your network, and then when you go through and look at those more advanced features, you can then expose services over the internet. You can share your Plex library with your friends or family. You can create you could host your own Nextcloud server, utilize that massive amount of storage that you've got now because you can just keep loading disks in. Allow people to use your Nextcloud server for tons of storage. Literally, the possibilities with Unraid are pretty much endless. You can do so much stuff. There are so many great community created applications and Docker containers out there. Obviously, I don't really want to go and do another video if you guys aren't going to find it useful, but if you do and you want me to delve into the power of Docker and specifically running, Docker apps for Unraid, then let me know in the comment section below, because I will be more than happy to create those videos as well. I can show you what I'm also running on my other server and just what you can do. I think it's a fantastic tool. Okay guys, so that is the end of the video. I'm going to leave it here. The parity array is still building, but like I mentioned, when that's done, all the drives are going to go green and you're going to be good to go. So if you liked the video, please leave it a thumbs up, give it a like. If you've got any questions, comments about Unraid specifically, or about this video, or any of the things that I've mentioned in this video, please leave me a comment in the section below. And please hit the subscribe button if you're interested in this kind of content. I cover lots of different things, mainly technology related, obviously. So things like Unraid, network setups, software, the cloud, development topics. So I do all kinds of stuff really. So, please consider subscribing and hit the bell notification so that you're notified in future.